The wind in Montana doesn't just whisper, it carries secrets. When Clara stepped off that train in 1878, she wasn't just bringing a suitcase, she was carrying a past heavy enough to break her. A stranger named Elias waited for her, a man of few words but steady eyes. He didn't ask questions, but some truths can't stay hidden forever. And when they surface, they don't just change lives, they test the very meaning of love, dignity, and what it means to belong. Stay with me, because this story isn't what you think. It's deeper, harsher, and far more human.
Montana, 1878. The wind here didn't just blow, it bit. Clara stepped off the train. Her legs shook, her leather trunk held almost nothing. Her secret, though, that weighed a ton. Elias was waiting. He stood by a weathered wagon, tall, quiet, eyes like the distant horizon. He didn't ask about the bags she didn't have. He didn't ask why she looked so pale. He just tipped his hat, took her trunk, and helped her up. The ride to the ranch took hours. The silence between them was thick. Clara's stomach churned, not from the rutted dirt road, from the truth hiding under her heavy wool dress. They reached the cabin after dark. It was small, built of thick pine. A fire was already laid out in the hearth, waiting for a match. Elias struck one. The room filled with a warm orange glow. "Sit," he said, voice low, rough but kind. He handed her a tin cup of water. Clara reached for it. Her fingers didn't make it. The room tilted. The firelight blurred into a streak of heat. Her knees buckled. Then, just blackness. When she finally opened her eyes, she was in a bed. A heavy quilt was pulled up to her chin. She shifted, felt a cold rush of panic. Her stiff binding dress was unbuttoned at the top. The corset strings were cut. The undeniable curve of her belly was right there in the open. He knew. She squeezed her eyes shut. She waited for the rage. She waited to be called a liar, a cheat, a ruined woman. But nobody yelled. Exhaustion dragged her right back into a dark, dreamless sleep. She woke to a freezing room. Morning light spilled across the wood floor. Clara sat up. Panic flared hot in her chest. She looked out the window. Elias was walking out toward the tree line. His stride was long, purposeful. In his right hand he carried his Winchester rifle. Her breath caught. He was coming back to force her off his land. To march her out at gunpoint. It was over. She scrambled out of bed. She grabbed her unlaced boots. Her hands shook so badly she dropped them twice. Before she could reach the door, the iron latch clicked. Elias stepped inside. He didn't look angry, just tired. He held 2 wild rabbits by the feet. He set the rifle down, leaned it carefully against the wall. Then he looked at her. Clara backed up against the bedpost. She hugged her arms tightly across her chest. "I can pack," she whispered. Her voice broke. "I'll go." Elias frowned. He set the rabbits on the washstand. He wiped his hands on a clean rag. "On. Go where?" he asked. "You know." She looked at the floorboards. "You saw." Elias stood still for a long moment. "I saw," he said softly. He took a step closer, not a threat, just closing the distance. "Then we have 2 to love," he said. Clara's head snapped up. She stared at him. Her mind couldn't make sense of the words. She braced herself for a trap. Men didn't talk like this. Men didn't forgive this. Elias looked her dead in the eye. He didn't whisper. He made sure every single word was clear, leaving absolutely no room for doubt. "Listen to me, Clara," he said firmly. "Out here, a new life is never a burden. You have the right to be safe here, and your worth as a human being isn't defined by an unexpected pregnancy. You are a free woman." Clara stood frozen. A single tear broke loose and tracked through the dust on her cheek. Elias turned back to the washstand. "Now," he said, rolling up his flannel sleeves, "let's get breakfast going. You need your strength." The sun didn't rise so much as it bled over the horizon, red, raw, unforgiving. Clara was already awake, had been for hours. She didn't sleep. Her mind wouldn't let her. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind tear at the log walls. She listened to the steady, even breathing of Elias sleeping on a narrow cot near the stove. "Then we have two to love," his words echoed in her head. They sounded like a promise, but Clara knew better. Promises back east were made of iron, and they still broke. Promises in the West seemed as fragile as dry grass under a wagon wheel. She needed to prove her worth, fast. She threw off the heavy quilt. The floorboards were like ice. She didn't care. She didn't have the luxury of feeling cold. She found the cast-iron stove. She hauled in split wood from the front porch. Her hands were raw from the train ride, but she ignored the sting. She lit the fire. She watched the flames catch the dry pine. She found flour in a tin bin, lard, salt, biscuits. She could make biscuits. She knew how to bake. She knew how to work. But biscuits weren't enough. Not to pay for her life. Not to pay for the life growing inside her. She found a wooden bucket. She walked outside to the pump. The morning air burned her lungs like swallowed glass. The sky was massive, empty, terrifying. She pumped the iron handle until her shoulders ached. The water was freezing. She hauled the heavy bucket back inside. She found a stiff bristle brush under the washstand. She got down on her hands and knees. She started scrubbing the floorboards. Scrub, breathe. The water turned gray, the wood turned pale. She moved from the hearth to the door, then back again. She worked until her knuckles bled, until her lower back screamed in protest. She ignored the dull, heavy ache low in her belly. She couldn't afford to be weak. She had to be useful. If she was useful, he wouldn't send her away. He wouldn't look at her with disgust. The sun climbed higher. The cabin warmed up. The smell of baking dough filled the small room. The heavy front door creaked open. Elias stepped inside. He wiped his boots carefully on the hemp mat. He took off his wide-brimmed hat. He stopped dead in his tracks. The cabin smelled like hot iron and fresh bread. The floor was soaking wet, spotless. Clara was on her knees near the table. Her hair was falling out of its neat pins. Sweat dripped down her neck. Her hands were red and shaking. She scrubbed fiercely. She didn't look up. "Clara." His voice was low, steady. It cut right through the sound of the brush against the wood. She flinched. Her shoulders hiked up to her ears. She scrubbed harder. "I'm almost done," she said quickly. The words tumbled over each other. "I'll get the windows next. The biscuits are nearly ready. I can mend your shirts after breakfast. I saw a tear in your blue flannel." "Clara, stop." "I'm not tired," she lied. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. "I can work. I pull my weight. You'll see, I won't be a burden." Elias crossed the room. His boots were heavy on the damp wood. He knelt beside her. He didn't grab her wrists. He didn't yell. He just placed his large, calloused hand flat over the wooden back of the brush she was holding. The movement was gentle, but it was immovable. It meant no more. She froze. Her chest heaved. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were wide, terrified, like a trapped animal waiting for the trap to snap shut. "You're going to hurt yourself," he said. "I have to earn my keep." Her voice cracked. A tear leaked out, mixing with the sweat on her cheek. "I have to pay you back." "Pay me back for what?" "For keeping me. For not throwing me out into the snow." Elias let out a slow, heavy breath. He took the brush from her hand. He tossed it into the bucket. It hit the dirty water with a dull splash. He stood up. He offered her his hand. Clara stared at it. It was a worker's hand, rough, scarred, dirt packed under the nails. She slowly reached out. He pulled her up effortlessly. He guided her to the wooden table. He pulled out a chair. "Sit," he said. She sat. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. She braced herself. She waited for the lecture. She waited for him to list all the things she owed him. Elias pulled up a chair opposite her. He sat down. He leaned forward. He rested his heavy forearms on the table. He looked straight at her. No pity, no anger, just plain, solid truth. "Clara, listen to me," Elias said. His tone was serious, unwavering. She swallowed hard. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "You don't owe me your blood," he said. "You don't owe me your exhaustion. And you sure as hell don't owe me an apology for breathing my air." He pointed a thick finger toward the window, out toward the sweeping, brutal plains of Montana. "Look out there. This land doesn't care if you're a man or a woman. It will freeze us. It will starve us. It will kill us both just the same if we aren't smart." He turned his eyes back to her. He held her gaze so she couldn't look away. "I need you to understand how things work here," Elias stated clearly, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. "Clara, on this ranch, the labor of a woman and a man holds equal value. We are equal partners in survival, not master and servant. You don't owe me servitude. You just need to work alongside me." The words hung in the air between them. Equal, partner, value. Clara blinked. Her mind raced to catch up. She was used to men who took, men who demanded. The wealthy mill owner back east had treated her like a piece of broken machinery. When she ruined his reputation by getting pregnant, he intended to throw her away. Men didn't talk about equality, not to women like her. "But I brought nothing," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the crackling stove. "I brought no money. I brought another man's child." "You brought yourself," Elias corrected instantly. "You brought a mind. You brought hands that know how to work. You brought life. That's capital out here. The rest is just noise." He tapped the table with 2 fingers. "You are not a hired hand," he said. "You are not my property. You are my partner. We share the load. Do you understand?" Clara felt a hard, painful knot in her chest begin to loosen. Just a fraction. But it was there. She took her first real breath since getting off the train. "I understand," she said softly. "Good." Elias nodded. He leaned back. The tension left his broad shoulders. "Now, I smell biscuits burning." Clara gasped. She jumped up. She grabbed a thick rag. She ran to the stove. She pulled the heavy iron pan out. The bottoms of the biscuits were a little dark, but they were saved. She set them on the table. She poured 2 cups of black boiling coffee. Elias took a biscuit. He broke it open. Steam rose from the white center. He took a bite. He chewed slowly. He nodded. "Best thing I've eaten in 3 years," he said. It wasn't a sweet compliment. It was just a fact. Clara sat down. She took a sip of the bitter coffee. The heat spread down her throat. They ate in silence. It wasn't the thick, awkward silence from the wagon ride the night before. It was the quiet of 2 people sharing a space, 2 people figuring out the rules. They had an agreement now, a boundary. He would handle the cattle, the fences, the heavy lifting outside in the elements. She would handle the house, the garden, the supplies, the preserving. They would sleep in separate beds. He kept the cot near the stove. She kept the main bed behind the canvas curtain. It was practical. It was safe. It was exactly what she needed to survive. The peace lasted exactly 2 hours. Elias had gone out to the barn to fix a broken leather harness. Clara was washing the tin breakfast plates in a basin. Then she heard it. The crunch of wooden wheels on the gravel road, the snorting of horses. She dried her hands. She looked out the small, wavy glass window. A polished buggy was pulling up to the front yard. It looked entirely out of place against the raw dirt and brown scrub brush. 3 women sat in the buggy. They wore dresses that belonged in an eastern parlor, not on the wild prairie. High, stiff collars, dark lace trim, hats pinned tightly against the relentless wind. Townsfolk. Clara wiped her hands on her apron again. Her heart picked up a sudden nervous rhythm. She smoothed her hair. She walked to the front door. She opened it just as the women were stepping down into the dust. The leader was an older woman, sharp, pale eyes, a mouth set in a permanent disapproving line. She looked like a woman who enjoyed knowing everyone's sins. "Good morning," the older woman called out. Her voice was too loud, too bright. It sounded like a trap snapping shut. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She kept her chin up. "Good morning, can I help you?" The three women stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. They didn't come closer. They just stared. Their eyes moved like locusts, over the rough-hewn cabin, over the dirt yard, and finally, over Clara. They looked at her simple hair, her faded apron, her loose dress. The older woman smiled. It didn't reach her pale eyes. "I am Mrs. Higgins," she said. "We heard Elias brought his mail-order bride home. We thought it only Christian to come and offer our welcomes to the territory." "Thank you," Clara said carefully. "That is very kind. Elias is out in the barn. I can fetch him if you need him." "Oh, no need to bother the man while he's working," said a younger woman beside Mrs. Higgins. She had pale hair and a pinched nose. "We came to see you, dear." The third woman nodded eagerly, like a bird pecking at scattered seeds. Clara stood her ground. She remembered what Elias had just said at the table. She wasn't a servant here. She was a partner. This was her porch. "Would you ladies care for some coffee?" Clara asked smoothly. "I have fresh biscuits." The women exchanged a look. A quick, sharp, silent conversation that spoke volumes. "Perhaps another time," Mrs. Higgins said, waving a gloved hand dismissively. "We just wanted to lay eyes on the girl who finally got Elias to settle down." Mrs. Higgins stepped a little closer to the bottom step. Her gaze dropped. She stared directly at Clara's midsection. Clara's breath hitched. Her heavy wool dress was loose, but she was showing. If you looked close enough, if you had a cruel eye, you could tell. Mrs. Higgins tilted her head. Her smile grew sharp, like a drawn straight razor. "Tell me, dear," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice dripping with poison disguised as honey. "Did the long train ride agree with you? You seem a bit flushed. And my, what a curious cut your dress has. It's quite full around the waistline for a brand new bride. Don't you think?" The wind seemed to stop howling. The silence in the dirt yard was suddenly deafening. Clara gripped the wooden door frame. Her knuckles turned stark white. They knew, or they suspected. The war wasn't just against the harsh land. It was against them. The buggy rolled away. The dust settled back into the hard Montana dirt. Clara stood on the porch. Her knuckles were still white on the doorframe. Her chest felt tight, like iron bands were wrapped around her ribs. She heard boots on the gravel. Heavy. Steady. Elias walked up from the barn. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked down the road at the disappearing buggy. He looked at Clara. He saw the tremor in her hands. He saw the pale, scared look in her eyes. He didn't ask what they said. He didn't have to. He knew this town. He knew how venomous bored people could be. "Get your coat," Elias said. Clara blinked. "What?" "Get your coat. And your bonnet." He turned toward the barn. "I'm hitching the wagon." "But I just started the washing. I have chores." "Chores can wait," he called back over his shoulder. "We're going to town." Panic flared in her chest. Town. Where those women lived. Where they would point and whisper, "Elias, no. Please, we don't need anything." He stopped. He turned around. He looked at her with that steady, unbreakable gaze. "We need them to see you," he said simply. "We need them to see you walking beside me. Hiding out here just proves them right. You don't hide on my land." Clara swallowed hard. She nodded once. She went inside and grabbed her heavy wool coat. The ride into town took an hour. The wind was picking up. It whipped the dry grass into a frenzy. The sky in the north was starting to look bruised. A pale, sickly yellow creeping into the gray. The town of Blackwood was nothing but a single dusty street. False front buildings, a saloon, a bank, a general store. Elias pulled the wagon up to the hitching post outside the store. He tied the reins. He stepped down and held out his hand. Clara took it. His grip was solid, reassuring. They walked up the wooden boardwalk. Elias opened the door. The bell above it jingled loudly. The store smelled like ground coffee, leather, and peppermint. It was warm, and it was crowded. The moment they stepped inside, the talking stopped. The silence hit like a physical blow. Heads turned, eyes darted. Clara felt a dozen stares burn into her heavy coat. She kept her chin down. She focused on the scuffed toes of her boots. Elias didn't flinch. He walked straight to the counter. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Morning, Jeb," Elias said to the storekeeper. His voice was calm, normal. "Need to fill this order." Jeb cleared his throat nervously. He wiped his hands on his apron. "Morning, Elias, ma'am. I'll get right on it." Clara stood beside Elias. She stared at a jar of hard candies. She tried to make herself small, invisible. Then the laugh came. It was loud, mean. It came from the back of the store, near the wood stove. A man was leaning against a barrel. He held a half-empty bottle in one hand. His clothes were dusty. His eyes were bloodshot. A ranch hand with too much time and too much whiskey before noon. "Well, well," the drunk drawled. His voice carried over the quiet room. "Look what the train dragged in." Elias didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on the counter. "Leave it be, Miller," he said quietly. Miller scoffed. He took a swig from his bottle. He stepped away from the stove. "Just making an observation, Elias. We all heard the Higgins woman talking. Said your mail-order bride came with a little extra baggage." Miller let out a crude, wet laugh. "Guess you didn't mind paying full price for used goods, huh?" Someone in the corner gasped. The storekeeper froze. Clara stopped breathing. The room spun. The shame was a physical weight crushing her lungs. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. She took a step back toward the door. Elias moved faster. He didn't draw a gun. He didn't raise his fists. He simply turned around. He stepped squarely in front of Clara. He became a solid wall of bone and muscle between her and the rest of the room. He walked slowly toward Miller. Miller stopped laughing. He straightened up. He suddenly realized how big Elias was, how utterly still his face was. The drunk took a nervous step back. Elias stopped a few feet away. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a hunting knife. Everyone expected blood. It was the West. Men died over smaller insults. But Elias didn't throw a punch. He didn't need to. He looked at Miller. Then he looked around the room. He met the eyes of every person staring at them. When he spoke, his voice wasn't a yell. It was a command, deep, resonant, and absolute. "A man's strength is measured by how he uses it to protect the vulnerable, not by degrading a woman," Elias declared. The words rang clear off the wooden walls. "Human respect is the highest law in this town, and every person deserves to be treated with dignity." He let the words hang there. He let them sink into the floorboards, into the minds of every gossip and coward in the room. Miller swallowed hard. His face turned a splotchy red. He looked down at his boots. He didn't say another word. He just turned, pushed open the back door, and stumbled out into the alley. The silence in the store was different now. It wasn't judgmental. It was ashamed. Elias turned back to the counter. "The flour, Jeb," Elias said calmly. "And wrap up a pound of that peppermint candy for my wife." Clara stared at his broad back. Her heart hammered against her ribs. My wife. He had claimed her, right out in the open. They loaded the wagon in silence. The wind was whipping up dust devils in the street. "We need to hurry," Elias said, looking at the northern sky. The purple bruise had spread. It was swallowing the sun. Temperatures dropping fast. He helped her up. He snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward. They left the town behind. The road stretched out, empty and gray. The cold came suddenly. It didn't creep in. It slammed into them like a physical wall. The air turned brittle. The wind howled, carrying tiny, stinging needles of ice. An early blizzard, the deadliest kind. "Pull the blanket over your head," Elias yelled over the roaring wind. Clara huddled on the wooden seat. She wrapped the wool blanket tight. She couldn't stop shivering. The cold was sinking into her bones, sinking into her belly. The wagon hit a deep rut. It bounced hard. The old draft horse whinnied in panic. The wind was blinding now. A solid wall of white. Suddenly the horse stumbled. It hit a patch of black ice hidden under the snow. Its front legs buckled. The wagon lurched violently. The sound of snapping wood cracked like a gunshot. The heavy harness broke. The horse went down hard with a terrible, agonizing scream. The wagon skidded and slammed to a halt at a sharp angle. Clara was thrown forward. Elias grabbed her arm, hauling her back before she pitched over the dashboard. They were stopped. Miles from the ranch, miles from town, surrounded by a howling sea of white. The wind screamed. It sounded like tearing metal. Elias jumped down into the knee-deep snow. He fought his way to the front of the wagon. Clara peered over the edge. Her heart was in her throat. The horse wasn't moving. Its chest was still. The fall had broken its neck. It was a quick end, quicker than freezing to death. Elias didn't waste time mourning. Out here, grief was a luxury that killed you. He waded back to the side of the wagon. His beard was already caked in ice. "We can't stay here," he shouted. The wind snatched the words right out of his mouth. "The wagon offers no cover. We'll freeze in an hour. Grab the bedroll. Grab the food sack." Clara forced her numb hands to move. She grabbed the heavy canvas bedroll. She slung the canvas sack of supplies over her shoulder. Elias reached up. He grabbed her waist and swung her down into the snow. The snow was up to her thighs. The cold shocked her system. She gasped. "Keep your head down," he yelled. "Follow my tracks. Step exactly where I step. Don't stop moving." He took the lead. He became a plow, pushing through the drifts. Clara followed. It was agony. Every step burned. Her lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. The wind pushed against her, trying to knock her flat. She focused on Elias's broad back, on the dark wool of his coat. It was the only thing anchoring her to the world. They walked for what felt like hours. It was probably only 20 minutes. Time didn't exist in the whiteout. Suddenly, Elias stopped. He grabbed her arm and pulled her sideways. They stepped out of the wind. The sudden quiet was jarring. Clara fell to her knees, gasping for air. She looked up. They were in a shallow, rocky overhang, a small cave carved into the side of a low bluff. It wasn't deep, but it blocked the wind. It was dry. Elias didn't stop moving. He dropped his pack. He moved to the back of the overhang. He started gathering dry brush and old dead sagebrush roots that had blown in over the summer. "Keep your coat on," he ordered. He pulled a brass match safe from his pocket. His hands were shaking from the cold, but his movements were precise. He struck a match. The wind tried to snatch it. He cupped his large hands around the tiny flame. He fed it to the dry brush. Smoke curled up. Then, a small orange flicker. He fed it more roots. He broke a dead branch over his knee. The fire grew. Light pushed back the shadows. Heat radiated outward. Clara dragged herself closer to the flames. She couldn't stop shaking. Her teeth chattered violently. Elias unrolled the heavy canvas bedroll on the rocky floor right next to the fire. "Sit," he said. He pushed her down onto the blankets. He took off his own heavy coat and wrapped it over her shoulders. "You need your coat," she managed to stutter. "I'm fine. Sit closer to the fire." He sat beside her. He tossed more wood onto the flames. The storm raged outside the cave, a solid wall of deadly white. But inside, in the small circle of firelight, it was just the two of them. The silence stretched out. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, hollow exhaustion. Clara stared into the fire. The flames danced and twisted. She felt the warmth seeping into her skin, but the cold inside her wouldn't melt. The encounter in the store, the crude laughter, the shame, it was all rushing back. She pulled her knees up to her chest. She wrapped her arms around her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elias looked at her. "For what? The horse? That was the ice. Not you. For everything." Her voice broke. The tears came, hot and fast. She couldn't stop them. The dam had finally broken. for bringing this trouble to your door, for what they said about me. They were right. They were fools, Elias said flatly. No. Clara shook her head violently. She squeezed her eyes shut. You don't know. You don't know where I came from. You don't know what I am. I know exactly who you are. You don't, she cried out. The firelight flickered across her tear-streaked face. I'm dirty, Elias. I'm ruined. She let out a ragged sob. The truth clawed its way out of her throat. She couldn't hold it back anymore. Back east, in Massachusetts, I worked in a textile mill. The owner, Mr. Sterling, he was a rich man, a powerful man. He noticed me. She hugged herself tighter, as if trying to hold her body together. He cornered me in the storeroom after shift. I fought him. I swear to God I fought him. But he was too strong. He locked the door. He told me if I screamed, he'd fire me, and my little sisters would starve in the winter. Her breath hitched. She stared blindly into the fire. When I realized I was with child, I went to him. I begged him for help. He laughed. He told his foreman to throw me out into the street. He said I was a whore trying to extort him. Nobody believed me. Nobody would hire me. I was ruined. She buried her face in her hands. I answered your ad because I wanted to die somewhere else. I didn't want my baby born in a gutter. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I brought my dirt to your clean house. The cave was silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Elias didn't move away. He didn't look at her with disgust. He reached out. He gently took her trembling hands and pulled them away from her face. His grip was warm, strong. He held her hands tightly. He looked straight into her tear-filled eyes. Clara, listen to me, he said. His voice was thick with emotion, but steady as bedrock. He leaned in closer. He made sure she heard every single syllable. The filth belongs to the man who trampled on your dignity, not you, Elias said fiercely. No one has the right to own or strip away another person's bodily autonomy. His crime is not your fault, and you have the absolute right to let go of that guilt. Clara stared at him. The words washed over her. Not her fault, bodily autonomy, right to let go. She had carried the blame for so long, she had worn the shame like a second skin. But hearing him say it, hearing a good, decent man place the blame exactly where it belonged, shattered the heavy chains around her chest. She let out a long, shuddering breath. She collapsed forward against his chest. Elias wrapped his arms around her. He held her tight. He rested his chin on the top of her head. He let her cry. He let the years of fear and poison wash out of her. They sat like that for a long time. The fire popped and hissed. The storm screamed outside. But inside, it felt safe. Then it happened. Clara gasped. Her body stiffened in his arms. Clara? Elias pulled back. What is it? She grabbed his forearm. Her fingers dug into his heavy wool sleeve like steel claws. Her eyes went wide with sudden primal terror. A sharp, tearing pain ripped through her lower back. It radiated around to her belly. It was blinding, breath-stealing. She looked down. A dark, wet stain was spreading across the skirt of her heavy dress. It wasn't blood, it was water. She looked back up at Elias. Her face was chalk white in the firelight. Elias? She whispered. A harsh groan ripped from her throat as another brutal cramp hit. Elias, it's too early. The baby is coming right now. Outside, the blizzard roared louder, burying the world in ice. The cave felt smaller now. The shadows stretched and danced against the rock. Clara screamed. The sound tore out of her throat. It cut through the howling wind outside. It was a raw, primal noise, the sound of a body being ripped apart. She gripped the heavy canvas bedroll. Her knuckles were bone white. She threw her head back. Her eyes were squeezed shut against the blinding pain. Elias didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for dead men. He moved fast. He threw the rest of the sagebrush roots onto the fire. The flames leaped higher. He needed light. He needed heat. He pulled his hunting knife from his belt. He held the blade in the fire until the steel glowed faintly orange. He set it on a clean rock. "Clara," he said. His voice was close, low, steady. "Look at me." She couldn't. Another wave of agony hit. She thrashed on the ground. He caught her shoulders. He held her down firmly but gently. "Clara, open your eyes. Look at me." She gasped for air. She forced her eyes open. Through the blur of tears and sweat, she saw his face. His jaw was set tight, but his eyes were calm, unshakable. "I can't," she sobbed. "It's too early. He's too small. I can't do this." "You can," Elias said. "You are doing it. Right now." "We need a doctor, Elias, please. We need a woman. I don't know what to do." "You don't need a doctor," he told her. "Your body knows what to do. You just have to let it. I am right here. I am not leaving." He pushed her heavy wool skirt up. He didn't hesitate. He didn't blush. This wasn't about modesty. This was survival. He had delivered 100 calves in the dead of winter. He knew the mechanics of birth. But this was different. This was a woman. This was Clara. The cave smelled of iron and smoke and sweat. "The baby is turning," Elias said. He kept his voice flat, reassuring. "He's coming fast. When the next pain hits, I need you to push. Push the pain out." Clara shook her head. Her hair was matted to her face. "I'm scared." "I know. But you're stronger than the fear." The next contraction rolled in. Clara felt it start in the center of her spine. It built like a freight train. It hit her with the force of a falling tree. "Now," Elias commanded. Clara pushed. She screamed until her throat bled. The firelight flickered. The wind roared. It went on for an hour, or a minute. Time was gone. There was only the fire, the pain, and Elias's steady, grounding voice in the dark. "Once more," Elias said. His hands were ready. "I see the head. Give me everything you have left, Clara. Bring him here." Clara took a ragged, tearing breath. She gathered every ounce of broken, battered strength she had left. She thought of the mill owner. She thought of the snow. She thought of the judgment in town. She pushed against all of it. With a final shattering cry, the pressure vanished. A sudden warm rush followed. Then, silence. Clara collapsed back onto the canvas. Her chest heaved. Her eyes fluttered. She was completely spent, empty. For one terrifying second, the cave was deadly quiet. Then, a sound, thin at first. A sputter, a cough. Then a sharp, angry wail that pierced the heavy air. Clara opened her eyes. Elias was kneeling near the fire. In his large, rough hands, he held a tiny, squirming, blood-slicked infant. He grabbed the clean rag he'd set aside. He swiftly cleared the baby's mouth and nose. The wail turned into a strong, furious cry. The sound of life fighting back against the dark. Elias tied the cord with a strip of leather. He picked up his sterilized knife and made a clean cut. He didn't hand the baby to her immediately. He took off his thick flannel overshirt. He wrapped the tiny boy in the warm, dry fabric. Then Elias moved to her side. He carefully laid the bundled baby on Clara's chest. Clara felt the small, warm weight. She saw a patch of dark hair, a tiny, perfect fist. She started to cry. Soft, exhausted tears. "He's breathing," she whispered. "He's alive." Elias sat back on his heels. He wiped the back of his hand across his forehead. His hands were covered in her blood. He looked from the baby to Clara. His rough face was completely undone. The stoic cowboy was gone. His eyes were shining in the firelight, thick with unshed tears. He reached out. He gently stroked the baby's cheek with his thumb. Then he looked up at Clara. The reverence in his eyes was absolute. "Folks praise the power of guns out west," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion, sounding almost like a prayer. "But the greatest resilience belongs to the women who risk their lives to bring forth new life. There is no gender divide in the face of life and death. You women hold power equal to any god." Clara touched his hand. Their fingers intertwined over the small bundle of life between them. The storm blew out just before dawn. The wind died down to a whisper. The sky cracked open, revealing a sharp, blinding blue. Elias wrapped Clara in the heavy canvas bedroll. He tied it securely around her. Then he picked her up. She held the baby tight against her chest, trapped in the warmth between their bodies. He carried them both. He trudged through the knee-deep snow, mile after agonizing mile. His boots crunched on the frozen crust. His muscles burned. But he never stopped. He never slowed down. By noon, the roof of the cabin appeared over the ridge. It was still standing. The chimney was cold, but the walls were intact, a beacon in the white wasteland. Elias pushed through the front gate. He walked up the steps onto the porch. His breathing was heavy, ragged. He shifted Clara's weight to open the heavy front door. That was when he saw it, pinned to the thick wood with a hunting knife. A piece of expensive cream-colored stationery, the kind of paper that didn't belong in Montana. The wind fluttered the edge of the paper. Elias leaned in close. The ink was dark and elegant. Just 6 words. "I know where you are." "Sterling." Elias pulled the knife loose. He crumpled the paper in his fist. He kicked the door open and carried his family inside. The cold had followed them home. Spring came to Montana like an apology. The snow melted into the dark earth. The prairie grass shot up, vibrant and green. The air lost its teeth and smelled of wet dirt and pine. At the ranch, life found a rhythm. The baby named Jack was thriving. He was small, but loud. He had a laugh that filled the small cabin and bounced off the log walls. Elias worked from sunup to sundown. He rebuilt the wagon. He mended fences broken by the snowdrifts. When he came inside at night, his hands were battered, but his eyes were soft. He would take Jack from Clara, holding the tiny boy against his broad chest, until they both fell asleep in the rocking chair. It looked like peace. It looked like a family. But Clara couldn't sleep. Every time a shadow moved past the window, her heart stopped. Every time the wind rattled the door hinges, she reached for the butcher knife on the counter. She hadn't forgotten the note. Elias had tried to hide it, but she had seen the expensive paper crumpled in the ash bin. She recognized the thick, arrogant curl of the handwriting. Sterling, he had found her, he hadn't let it go. Her ruining his reputation back east had wounded his pride. And men like Sterling didn't just forgive, they destroyed. It was only a matter of time. The spring mud on the roads was drying. Travel was becoming easy again. He would come, or he would send his men. They would bring guns, they would bring fire, and Elias would stand in front of her, just like he did at the store. He would fight for her, and he would die for her. Clara couldn't let that happen. Elias had given her back her dignity. He had delivered her son. He had treated her like an equal. He was the first good thing she had ever known. She loved him, deeply, fiercely, and because she loved him, she had to leave him. She waited until a Tuesday. Elias rode out to the far pasture to track a stray calf. He said he wouldn't be back until sunset. Clara moved quickly. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve was cold and hard as iron. She pulled her leather trunk from under the bed. She didn't pack much. Just 2 changes of clothes for herself, the baby's flannel blankets, a small sack of dried meat and biscuits. She bundled Jack warmly. He cooed, reaching for the silver clasp on her cape. "Hush, sweet boy," she whispered, a tear escaping down her cheek. "We have to go. We have to keep him safe." She hauled the trunk to the front door. She took one last look around the cabin. The stove she had scrubbed, the curtains she had sewn, the rocking chair where Elias held Jack. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. But she didn't stop. She opened the door. She stepped out onto the porch. Elias was standing at the bottom of the steps. Clara froze. The breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. He wasn't on his horse. He wasn't in the far pasture. He was standing there, staring at the leather trunk in her hand. His face was unreadable, a mask of carved stone. "Where are you going, Clara?" he asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. Clara swallowed hard. She gripped the handle of the trunk. "I have to leave, Elias. You know why. The roads are clear now. They'll come." Elias stepped up onto the porch. He didn't look angry. He looked broken. "So you run?" he asked. "You pack up my son and you run?" "He's not yours," Clara blurted out. It was a lie to push him away. A cruel, desperate lie to make it easier for him to let her go. Elias flinched as if she had struck him with a whip. But he didn't back down. "He took his first breath in my hands," Elias said fiercely. "He is mine in every way that matters. And you are my wife." "I am a target!" Clara yelled. The tears spilled over. "Sterling is a monster, Elias. He has money. He has men. If I stay here, they will burn this ranch to the ground. They will kill you to get to me. I won't let my past destroy your life." "It is my life," Elias roared back. The sudden volume shocked her. "You are my life." Clara took a step back. She hugged Jack tighter to her chest. The baby began to fuss, sensing the tension. Elias closed the distance between them. He gently placed his large, scarred hand over hers, trapping her hand on the trunk's handle. He looked down into her eyes. The stone mask cracked. She saw the raw, desperate fear underneath, the fear of losing them. "Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, pleading rasp, "you think you're doing the brave thing. You think sacrificing yourself is the only way to show you care." He let go of the trunk. He brought his hands up to frame her face. His thumbs wiped away her tears. He held her gaze, making sure she absorbed every single word. "True compassion between people doesn't mean bearing every sacrifice alone," Elias told her, his voice ringing with absolute clarity and conviction. "Your most fundamental right now is the right to be loved, and to be allowed to lean on someone when you're weak. Don't strip away my right to protect my family." Clara let out a choked sob. Her knees gave out. Elias caught her. He pulled her against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and the baby, a solid, impenetrable fortress. "We don't run," he whispered into her hair. "We stand our ground. We fight them together. Understand?" Clara buried her face in his shoulder. She finally surrendered. "Okay," she cried softly. "Okay." She let him carry the trunk back inside. She let him close the heavy door and slide the iron bolt home. 50 miles away in the town of Blackwood, the swinging doors of the saloon banged open. The afternoon crowd was sparse. A few ranchers playing cards, Jeb wiping down the long oak bar. A stranger walked in. He didn't look like a cowboy. He wore a tailored wool suit, a silk vest, a pristine bowler hat that caught the dim light. His boots were clean leather, completely untouched by the Montana mud. He walked to the bar. His footsteps were light, measured. Jeb stopped wiping the counter. He eyed the man warily. "What'll it be, mister?" The stranger smiled. It was a thin, humorless line. "No whiskey, thank you," the man said. His accent was sharp, East Coast, cultured, but with a cold, metallic edge beneath it. "I am looking for someone. I have a rather lucrative reward for anyone with information." The card game at the table stopped. Heads turned. The stranger reached into his tailored breast pocket. He pulled out a small, crisp photograph and laid it flat on the damp oak bar. "I am looking for a young woman," the man said smoothly. His eyes tracked across the room, taking in every face. "She arrived in this territory a few months ago. Her maiden name is Clara Vance." The stranger tapped the photograph with a manicured fingernail. "And I strongly advise you tell me exactly where I can find her." They didn't have to wait long. 3 days after Clara tried to run, a cloud of dust appeared on the southern road. It was mid-morning. The sky was an empty, endless blue. The air was already hot, baking the smell of dry pine and sagebrush into the dirt. Elias stood on the porch. He held a cup of black coffee. He didn't wear his gun belt. He wore his work clothes, faded denim, a worn canvas coat. Beside him stood Sheriff Hayes. Hayes was an older man, gray hair, a thick mustache. He had a tin star pinned to his vest and a loaded Colt resting comfortably on his hip. Elias had ridden into town the day before. He had laid everything out, the truth, the threat. Hayes was a good man. He didn't care about Eastern money. He cared about his town. "That'll be him," Hayes said quietly. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Elias nodded. He set his coffee cup on the porch rail. "Stay inside, Clara," he called over his shoulder. Inside the cabin, Clara stood by the window. She held baby Jack tight to her chest. Her heart was beating so fast it made her ribs ache. She watched the rider get closer. He rode a rented livery horse. The animal looked tired. The man did not. He wore a dark, tailored suit. A silver watch chain gleamed across his vest. He looked like a banker. But he moved like a snake. He pulled the horse to a stop at the edge of the yard. He didn't dismount right away. He looked at the cabin. He looked at Elias. He looked at the sheriff. He smiled. It was a cold, thin expression. He swung down from the saddle. He dusted off his sleeves. He walked up to the bottom of the porch steps. "Good morning," the man said. His voice was smooth, educated. It didn't belong in the dirt. "My name is Stone. I represent Mr. Arthur Sterling, of Boston." "State your business, Stone," Sheriff Hayes said. He rested his hand casually on his belt buckle, inches from his gun. Stone reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment. "I am here to collect," Stone said smoothly. "A woman residing on this property. Clara Vance. She is a fugitive from the law." Inside the cabin, Clara closed her eyes. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under her. Elias didn't blink. He didn't move. "My wife's name is Clara. She ain't a fugitive. She's a homesteader, same as me." Stone chuckled. A dry, rattling sound. He unfolded the paper. "She is a thief," Stone corrected. He held the paper out. "She signed a contract of employment with Mr. Sterling's mill. She broke that contract. Worse, she stole $75 from the company's safe before she fled. I have a sworn affidavit, a warrant for her arrest, and a legal claim to return her to Boston to face justice." He held the paper out to the sheriff. Hayes stepped down. He took the paper. He read it slowly. The silence in the yard was heavy, just the wind pushing through the dry grass. "Looks official," Hayes muttered. He handed the paper to Elias. Elias looked at it. He saw the elegant handwriting, the wax seal, the blatant, calculated lies. Sterling couldn't claim her as property, so he claimed she owed him a debt. He made her a criminal. "It's a fake," Elias said flatly. "It is signed by a Superior Court judge in Massachusetts," Stone countered. His voice sharpened. The polite mask was slipping. "You are harboring a criminal, Cowboy. Interfere with my duties, and I will have the federal marshals down on this dirt patch by the end of the week. Send the girl out." Stone took a step up the wooden stairs. Elias moved. He was incredibly fast for a big man. He stepped right to the edge of the stairs. He blocked Stone completely. His broad chest was a wall. Stone stopped. He looked up at Elias. For the first time, a flicker of genuine caution crossed the Easterner's face. "Back up," Elias said softly. "The law is on my side," Stone hissed. Sheriff Hayes walked back up the steps. He stood next to Elias. "Well, Mr. Stone," Hayes said slowly, "I see a few problems with this paper of yours. First off, a Massachusetts warrant ain't worth the ink it's printed on in the Montana Territory unless a territorial judge signs off on it. Second, you ain't a federal marshal. You're a hired dog." Stone's face went rigid. "That document proves a legal debt. She is bound by law to return." Elias took the paper. He held it up in the bright morning sun. He didn't tear it. He didn't crumple it. He looked Stone dead in the eye. "The laws of America were created to protect human freedom, not to serve as a tool for the strong to exploit the weak," Elias said clearly. His voice was thunder. It carried absolute conviction. "Your forged debt paper is absolutely worthless against her right to personal liberty. Human beings are not property." He dropped the paper. It fluttered down into the dirt, right onto the toe of Stone's polished boot. "She doesn't owe Sterling a dime," Elias continued. "And she certainly doesn't owe him her life. Now, get off my land." Stone stared at the paper in the dirt. His jaw twitched. He looked at the sheriff. Hayes had his thumb resting on the hammer of his Colt. Stone was a smart man. He knew when he was beat. For now. He let out a short, sharp breath. He turned around. He walked back to his rented horse. He gathered the reins and climbed into the saddle. "Sterling doesn't let things go," Stone called back. His voice was pure venom now. "You're making a mistake, Cowboy. A fatal one." "Road's that way," Hayes pointed. Stone spurred his horse. He rode off toward the main trail. The dust kicked up behind him. Elias watched him go. He watched until the rider was nothing but a speck on the horizon. Only then did the tension leave his shoulders. He turned around. He walked into the cabin. Clara was shaking. Tears were streaming down her face. She held Jack so tight the baby was starting to squirm. Elias walked over to her. He wrapped his arms around both of them. "He's gone," Elias whispered. "It's over. The law is on our side." Clara buried her face in his neck. She breathed in the smell of coffee and dust and safety. "He said Sterling wouldn't let it go." "Let him try," Elias said softly. "He can't touch you here." But they underestimated the cowardice of a man like Stone. An hour passed. The sun climbed toward noon. Elias was sitting at the table cleaning his rifle. Just to be safe. Clara was putting Jack down in his wooden cradle. Then Elias stopped. He lifted his head. He sniffed the air. Smoke. Not wood smoke from a chimney. The harsh, acrid smell of burning dry grass. Elias dropped the rag. He grabbed his rifle. He threw open the front door. The wind had picked up. It was blowing hard from the east. And from the east, a massive column of thick black smoke was rising into the blue sky. It wasn't coming from the prairie. It was coming from the back of the property. "The hay barn!" Elias shouted. His face went pale. Stone hadn't ridden back to town. He had circled around. He had hit them where it hurt the most, their winter feed, their livelihood. Elias jumped off the porch and ran toward the smoke. The heat hit them before they even saw the flames. Clara ran out onto the porch. The sky was turning gray with ash. The roar of the fire sounded like a rushing river. The hay barn was a massive wooden structure. It held tons of dry prairie grass, carefully cut and stored to keep the cattle alive through the brutal winter. Now it was an inferno. Flames shot out of the roof. The dry wood cracked and popped like gunshots. The wind whipped the fire into a frenzy, pushing hungry orange tongues toward the main corral. Elias was running. "The mules!" he screamed back at Clara. "Stay at the house!" He didn't stop. He sprinted straight into the blinding heat. 2 draft mules were tied to the rail just outside the barn. The animals were panicked, rearing up, pulling violently against their leather tethers. Their eyes were wide with terror. The heat was melting the paint off the side of the barn. Burning embers rained down from the roof. Elias reached the rail. He threw his arm over his face to block the searing heat. He pulled his hunting knife. He slashed the leather rope holding the first mule. He slapped its rear hard. The animal bolted away from the fire, running blind out into the open pasture. He moved to the second mule. Suddenly the wind shifted. A massive gust blew straight out of the barn door. A wall of solid flame rolled over Elias. "Elias!" Clara screamed from the porch. The second mule broke free, tearing the rail right out of the ground. It galloped away. Elias staggered back. He fell to his knees in the dirt. His canvas coat was smoking. He scrambled backward, dragging himself away from the radiant heat. He patted down his smoldering sleeves. He rolled in the dirt. Clara grabbed a bucket from the pump. She ran toward him. She didn't care about the heat. She didn't care about the embers burning holes in her dress. She threw the water over his back. Elias gasped. He sat up. His face was covered in black soot. He looked at the barn. The roof caved in. A massive fountain of sparks shot 100 feet into the air. The structure collapsed in on itself. The heat was unbearable. They had to back up. "The feed," Elias whispered. His voice was hoarse from the smoke. "It's all gone. Every last bale." Clara fell to her knees beside him. She grabbed his arm. "You're alive. That's all that matters. You're alive." Then she looked at his hands. He had dropped his knife. His hands were held out in front of him. Stiff, trembling. The skin on his palms and the backs of his fingers was charred black and angry, peeling red. He had used his hands to shield his face from the blast of flame. "Oh, God," Clara breathed. The horror settled in her stomach like a lead weight. A rancher needed his hands. Hands held the reins. Hands swung the axe. Hands fired the rifle. Without his hands, Elias couldn't work. If he couldn't work, they would starve. "It's bad," Elias gritted out. The pain was just hitting him, his jaw locked. "I need to get you inside. I need cool water. I need clean rags." She helped him stand. He leaned heavily against her. They stumbled back toward the cabin. The fire raged behind them. It would burn itself out eventually. There was nothing left to save. Suddenly a sound cut through the roar of the flames, the clatter of wagon wheels, the shouting of men. Clara looked up toward the main road. A wagon was tearing down the driveway. Then another and another. Half a dozen wagons, a dozen men on horseback. It was the town. Sheriff Hayes was in the lead. Behind him were the men from the general store, the blacksmith, the ranchers from the neighboring spreads. Even Miller, the drunk from the store, was sitting in the back of a wagon holding a shovel. They poured into the yard. They didn't wait for instructions. "Form a line to the creek," the blacksmith bellowed. "Get those shovels moving. Cut a trench. Don't let it reach the house." Men jumped down into the dirt. They ran past Elias and Clara. They grabbed buckets. They swung shovels, digging frantically into the hard earth to create a fire break. Women jumped down from the wagons too. They ran to the pump. They organized the water line. Clara stood frozen. She couldn't believe her eyes. These were the people who had judged her, the people who had gossiped, the people who thought she was ruined. And here they were, fighting the flames, breathing the smoke, risking their own lives to save her home. "Get him inside," a sharp voice ordered. Clara turned. It was Mrs. Higgins, the older woman from the buggy. Her expensive dress was already stained with soot. Her hat was gone. "Don't just stand there, child," Mrs. Higgins barked. But there was no malice in her voice, just pure pragmatic urgency. "Get him inside. I have burn salve in my satchel." Clara nodded numbly. She helped Elias up the stairs. They got him to the wooden table. Elias slumped into the chair. His breathing was shallow and ragged. Mrs. Higgins rushed in behind them. She opened her leather bag. She pulled out a jar of thick yellow paste and rolls of clean white cotton. "Wash his hands," Mrs. Higgins ordered. "Gently. Use the boiled water from the kettle. Let it cool first." Clara worked fast. Her hands shook, but her focus was absolute. She cleaned the soot and dirt from his raw, blistered skin. Elias didn't make a sound, but the muscles in his jaw jumped with every touch. Outside, the shouting continued. The splash of water, the thud of shovels. It took 2 hours. By mid-afternoon, the fire was out. The hay barn was nothing but a smoking black scar on the earth. The winter feed was gone. It was a devastating loss. It would take a miracle to keep the cattle alive through the coming winter. But the house was safe. The corral was safe. The prairie hadn't burned. The men sat in the dirt yard, exhausted. Their faces were black with soot. They drank water from the pump, passing a tin cup back and forth. Clara walked out onto the porch. She looked at the ruin. She looked at the exhausted men. She looked at Mrs. Higgins, who was wiping soot from her face with a damp rag. The guilt was a physical, crushing weight. Clara stepped off the porch. She walked toward the crowd. "I'm sorry," Clara said. Her voice broke. She looked at the tired, dirty faces. "I am so sorry. This was because of me. A man from my past. He did this. I brought this trouble to your town, to your lives." She covered her mouth to stifle a sob. She felt exactly like she did back east, like a burden, like a curse. Mrs. Higgins stopped wiping her face. She dropped the rag into a bucket. She walked over to Clara. The older woman didn't look down her nose this time. She didn't look for flaws. She reached out. She wrapped her arms around Clara in a tight, fiercely protective embrace. Clara stiffened in shock. Then she collapsed against the older woman's shoulder, weeping. Mrs. Higgins rubbed her back. She looked at the smoking ruins of the barn, and then she spoke, her voice carrying over the quiet yard so everyone could hear. "Nobody survives the West alone, girl," Mrs. Higgins said firmly, stating the fundamental law of the frontier. "Our shared humanity and compassion are the only things keeping this land from swallowing us whole. Never reject the kindness of your neighbors." She pulled back. She looked Clara straight in the eye. "You are one of us now," Mrs. Higgins said. "We protect our own. That eastern coward can burn a barn, but he can't burn a community." Clara looked around the yard. Men were nodding. Sheriff Hayes tipped his hat. They had lost the barn. But as Clara looked at the soot-stained faces of her neighbors, she realized something profound. She had finally found a home. She wiped her tears. She squared her shoulders. She turned and walked back inside the cabin. Elias was sitting at the table. His hands were heavily bandaged in white cotton. He looked pale, exhausted. Clara walked up to him. She knelt beside his chair. "They put it out," she said softly. Elias nodded slowly. He looked down at his useless, wrapped hands. "The feed is gone," he said. His voice was hollow, defeated. "And I can't even hold a hammer to rebuild." Clara looked at the white bandages. She saw the red stains seeping through the cotton. If infection set in, the doctor would have to cut the hands off to save his life. It was the reality of the frontier. She took a deep breath. "You rested on me when I was weak," Clara said fiercely. "Now it's my turn. You are going to heal, and I am going to run this ranch." The axe was heavy, heavier than Clara expected. The wooden handle was smooth from Elias's grip. Now it tore at her soft palms. She swung. The blade bit into the pine log. It stuck. She grunted, pulled. The wood wouldn't let go. She put her boot on the log and yanked the handle hard. The axe came free. She swung again. This time the wood split with a sharp, satisfying crack. Clara wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her sleeve. It was barely dawn. The air was bone-chilling, but her dress was already damp with sweat. She gathered the split wood. She piled it into her apron. She walked toward the cabin. Her legs ached. Her back burned. She looked at the black scar on the earth where the hay barn used to be. It was a daily reminder. They had survived the fire, but winter was still coming. She walked up the porch steps. She kicked the snow off her boots. She pushed the heavy door open. The cabin was warm. The smell of boiling coffee filled the small room. Elias was sitting at the table. He was staring out the window. He didn't turn when she walked in. He just kept looking out at the yard, at the woodpile, at the work he couldn't do. His hands rested on his thighs. They were wrapped in thick white cotton. The bandages were stained with yellow salve and faint spots of dried blood. Clara dropped the wood into the iron bin by the stove. The clatter was loud in the quiet room. Elias flinched, just a fraction. "I could have done that," he said. His voice was low, rough. It sounded like gravel grinding together. Clara walked to the stove. She poured hot water from the kettle into a tin basin. "You can't hold the axe, Elias," she said gently. "I can hold it. You'll tear the stitches. You'll open the blisters. Mrs. Higgins said 2 more weeks before you even try to make a fist." Elias turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, stormy. It had been 3 weeks since the fire. 3 weeks of sitting, 3 weeks of watching Clara do the work of 2 men. She fed the remaining stock. She hauled the water. She chopped the wood. The exhaustion was carved into her face. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. She was losing weight, and it was his fault. That was how he saw it. "Bring the basin over here," Elias said. Defeat hung heavy on the words. Clara carried the steaming basin to the table. She brought the jar of yellow salve, a stack of clean boiled rags. She sat down opposite him. She reached across the table. Elias hesitated. Then, slowly, he lifted his wrapped hands and placed them in hers. Clara worked carefully. She unwound the cotton strips, 1 loop at a time. The fabric stuck to the healing burns. She used a damp rag to dab the edges, loosening the dried blood. He didn't make a sound. He just stared at the table. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle twitched. The last layer came off. The skin was angry, red and raw. Thick, shiny scars were forming across his knuckles and down the backs of his hands. The burns had eaten deep. His hands looked brutalized, ruined. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She dipped 2 fingers into the jar of salve. It smelled of sulfur and beeswax. She gently applied the medicine to the new scars. Her touch was incredibly light. A feather against bruised glass. "I'm a dead weight, Clara," Elias said suddenly. The words punched their way out of his throat. Clara stopped moving. She kept her hands under his. "Don't say that. It's the truth." He finally looked up at her. The despair in his eyes was absolute. "A rancher without hands is just another mouth to feed. You're killing yourself out there. I see it. You're chopping the wood. You're lifting the feed. You're doing my job while I sit here like a broken piece of furniture." He tried to pull his hands away. He was ashamed of them, ashamed of his weakness. Clara tightened her grip. She didn't let him pull away. "I'm supposed to protect you," Elias whispered. The anger in his voice was aimed entirely at himself. "I told you I'd keep you safe. Now look at us. You're carrying the whole world, and I can't even pick up my own son." Clara took a slow, deep breath. She looked at his scarred, ruined hands. Then she looked right into his dark, tired eyes. She didn't offer empty pity. She didn't offer a sweet, meaningless comfort. She gave him the hard, solid truth. "Elias, listen to me," Clara said. Her voice was steady. It rang with absolute clarity in the quiet cabin. "Equality means we take turns being the anchor. Yesterday you were the shield for me and my son. Today I will be your hands. Unconditional love is seeing a partner's true worth even when they are at their weakest." Elias stopped pulling. He stared at her. The words hit him. Hard. "You didn't lose your worth in that fire," Clara told him fiercely. "You saved our lives. You gave me a home. You gave me my dignity back. Did you really think I would run the second the wind changed direction?" She picked up a clean strip of cotton. She began to wrap his left hand. "I am tired, Elias," she admitted. "My back hurts. The axe is heavy. But I am not broken. And I am not leaving." She tied off the bandage. She moved to the right hand. "You'll heal," she said. "Your hands will be scarred. They will be stiff. But they will work again. Until then, you tell me what to do, and I will do it. We are partners, remember?" Elias let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension finally drained out of his broad shoulders. He looked at her hands. Her knuckles were bruised, her nails were chipped. They were workers' hands now. "Partners," he repeated softly. "Always," Clara said. She tied off the final bandage. She stood up. She carried the bloody rags to the wash basin. Elias watched her walk away. The despair was gone, replaced by something else, something much deeper. Months passed. The snow came heavy and deep, but they survived. The neighbors brought extra feed. Clara stretched every dollar, every sack of flour. By late spring, the snow finally melted. The prairie turned green again. Elias's hands healed. The scars were thick and tight. They ached when the weather turned cold. He couldn't fully straighten his fingers. But he could grip a hammer. He could hold the reins. He could swing an axe. He was whole again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, Elias walked up to the porch. Clara was sitting in the rocking chair. Baby Jack was asleep against her chest. Elias stopped at the bottom step. He took off his hat. He walked up and knelt beside her chair. Clara smiled. "The fences are done?" "Fences are done," he said. He reached out with his scarred, misshapen hand. He gently covered hers. "Clara," he said softly. She looked down at him. His face was serious, nervous even. "When you came here," Elias said, "we made a deal. It was survival. It was practical." Clara's smile faded slightly. "It was. It's not just survival anymore," he told her. He traced the back of her hand with his thumb. "I don't want a deal. I don't want a contract." He looked up into her eyes. "I want a marriage," Elias said. "A real one. I want to stand up in front of God and everyone in that town. I want to say the words, 'I want you to be my wife because you want to be, not because you have nowhere else to go.'" Clara's breath hitched. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "Elias, will you marry me, Clara?" he asked. His voice was steady now. "Sure." "For real this time." Clara looked at the good, honorable man kneeling before her. She looked at his scarred hands, broken in the act of saving her. She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. For real this time." The sky was massive, an endless, unbroken dome of brilliant blue. It was late August. The prairie grass was tall and golden, swaying gently in the warm wind. The air smelled of wild sage and sweet dust. The ranch yard was full. Half a dozen wagons were parked near the new corral. Horses whinnied. Children chased each other around the water pump, their laughter echoing off the log walls of the cabin. The town of Blackwood had come out in force. A long wooden table was set up under the shade of a large cottonwood tree. It groaned under the weight of the food: roasted venison, stacks of fresh golden biscuits, jars of preserved peaches. Mrs. Higgins was holding court near the table. She wore her best Sunday dress. She was ordering 2 young ranch hands to carry a heavy barrel of cider. "Careful with that, you clumsy fools," she barked. Then she spotted a small child reaching for a peach. Her face softened instantly. "Go on. Take 2, sweetheart." Near the porch, Elias stood with Sheriff Hayes. Elias wore a brand-new suit, dark wool, tailored. It felt stiff and strange against his shoulders. He pulled at the stiff white collar. "Leave it be, Elias," Sheriff Hayes chuckled. "You look like a proper gentleman. She ain't gonna run off now." Elias dropped his hand. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He looked down at his hands. The thick, silvery scars stood out sharply against the dark fabric of his sleeves. He didn't try to hide them. He didn't keep them in his pockets. They were proof of what he had survived, proof of what he had protected. "It's time," Hayes said gently. He tapped his tin star. "I got the good book ready. We're doing this legal and right." Elias nodded. He turned toward the cabin. The heavy wooden door opened. The yard went quiet. The children stopped running. The men took off their hats. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She didn't wear a heavy, binding Eastern gown. She wore a dress she had sewn herself. Light, breathable cotton, the color of a pale summer sky. Her dark hair was swept up, held by a simple silver comb. She looked beautiful. But more than that, she looked strong. She looked at peace. She held baby Jack by the hand. Jack was over a year old now, a sturdy, fearless little boy. He wore tiny leather boots that Elias had made for him. Clara let go of his hand. Jack wobbled. He stood alone on the edge of the porch. He looked out at the crowd. Then he looked at Elias. He let out a happy shriek. He took a step, then another. Clumsy, uncoordinated steps. Elias dropped to one knee in the dirt. He held his scarred arms open wide. Jack practically ran the last 3 steps. He tumbled right into Elias's chest. Elias caught him, burying his face in the boy's soft hair. The crowd let out a collective, joyful cheer. Clara walked down the steps. She stopped in front of Elias. Elias stood up, lifting Jack into his left arm. He offered his right arm to Clara. She took it. Her hand rested warmly over his scars. They walked together toward the massive cottonwood tree. Sheriff Hayes stood waiting with a worn leather Bible. The town gathered around them in a wide, silent circle. The wind hushed. The prairie seemed to hold its breath. "We are gathered here," Hayes began, his voice deep and solemn, "under God's sky, to witness the joining of this man and this woman. They've already survived the fire. They've survived the winter. What they're doing today ain't just a promise for the future. It's a victory over the past." Hayes looked at Elias, then at Clara. "You wrote your own words," Hayes said. "Say 'em loud." Elias turned to face Clara. He handed Jack to Mrs. Higgins, who took the boy with a watery, tender smile. Elias took both of Clara's hands in his. He looked at her. He saw the frightened, ruined girl who had stepped off the train. And he saw the fierce, unyielding woman standing before him now. Clara looked back at him. She saw the quiet, lonely cowboy, and she saw the anchor who had held her steady through the storm. They spoke together, their voices blended, one deep and resonant, one clear and steady. They spoke the words they had carefully written by the light of the hearth fire. They didn't just speak to each other. They spoke to the community surrounding them. "We come to each other not whole or perfect," they said together, their words ringing out clearly over the silent yard. "But with a profound respect for human dignity and unconditional love. This family will always be a place where human rights are protected, wounds are healed, and no one is ever left behind." The words hung in the warm summer air, heavy, true, unbreakable. A few women in the crowd wiped their eyes. Even the blacksmith had to clear his throat and look up at the sky. Sheriff Hayes smiled. He closed the Bible with a soft thud. "By the power vested in me by the Montana Territory," Hayes declared loudly, "and by the obvious truth in front of my own 2 eyes, I pronounce you husband and wife." Hayes grinned. "You can kiss her now, Elias, before the cider gets warm." Elias didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Clara close. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, careful kiss. It was deep, passionate, a promise sealed in broad daylight. The crowd erupted, cheering, whistling. Clara laughed against his mouth. She wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him tight. They pulled back. They looked out at the people celebrating them. They looked at Jack, who was happily chewing on a biscuit in Mrs. Higgins' arms. They looked out at the endless expanse of the western frontier. It was a harsh land. It was unforgiving. It could burn you, freeze you, and break you down to nothing. But if you stood your ground, if you held on to the person beside you with everything you had, if you treated every soul with the dignity they deserved, you could build something beautiful from the ashes. Elias squeezed her hand. "Let's go home," he whispered. Clara smiled. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We're already there." This story exists within the realm of fiction, where imagination shapes reality. Any similarities to real-life individuals, organizations, or events are entirely coincidental. The author does not endorse or represent any real entity through the content of this work.
As the wind settles over the wide Montana plains and the echoes of hardship slowly fade into silence, what remains is not the memory of pain, but the quiet strength that carried Clara and Elias through it. Their story is not just one of survival in a brutal land. It is a testament to something far greater, the unyielding dignity of the human spirit. Clara arrived burdened by shame that was never hers to carry, shaped by a world that judged too quickly and forgave too little. Yet, in a place where life strips everything down to its raw truth, she discovered something powerful, that worth is not defined by the past, but by the courage to keep going. And Elias, a man forged by solitude and hardship, showed that true strength does not lie in dominance or pride, but in compassion, the kind that stands firm when others would turn away. This story reminds us that love, in its truest form, is not about perfection or convenience. It is about choosing someone again and again, even when the world gives you every reason not to. It is about standing beside another human being and saying, "You are not alone," when they feel most abandoned. In a society that often rushes to label, judge, and discard, Clara and Elias teach us that healing begins where judgment ends. Their journey shows that partnership is not built on control or obligation, but on equality, trust, and the willingness to carry each other's burdens when the road becomes too heavy. There is also a deeper truth woven into their story, the power of community and human connection. At first, the town looked at Clara with suspicion, even cruelty. But when faced with real loss and real danger, those same people chose compassion over condemnation. It is a reminder that beneath fear and prejudice, there is always the potential for kindness. And sometimes it takes courage, not just to stand alone, but to accept the help of others, to believe that you are worthy of being protected, supported, and loved. The meaning of this story reaches beyond the frontier. It speaks to anyone who has ever felt broken, unwanted, or defined by their past. It tells us that no matter how harsh the world may seem, there is always space for redemption, for dignity, and for love that does not demand, but understands. True strength is not about never falling. It is about rising again, even when everything within you says you cannot. And true love is not about saving someone. It is about walking beside them as they learn to save themselves. So as this story comes to an end, let it leave you with this. You are not your mistakes, you are not your scars, and you are never beyond the reach of compassion. Somewhere, in some quiet corner of this vast world, there is always the possibility of a new beginning, of someone who sees you not for what you've been through, but for who you truly are. And sometimes, that is all it takes to change a life forever.